Jamal stood in front of his canvas, staring at the abstract strokes he had created. His small studio was cluttered with canvases, some completed, some unfinished, all covered in layers of paint, each one representing a piece of his soul. The vibrant colors of red, blue, and gold clashed and danced together, forming shapes and patterns that spoke to the deepest parts of the human experience: joy, pain, hope, and despair. But tonight, as he looked at his work, all he felt was the weight of rejection. The world outside his studio was one of opulence and exclusion. The art galleries, the prestigious critics, the curators, they all demanded something that was already familiar, something they could market and sell without controversy. Jamal's work didn't fit that mold. His art wasn't safe, wasn't designed for easy consumption. It told the truth, a truth that didn't always sit comfortably with the rich and powerful who controlled the art world. Jamal had always known that he was different. He wasn't like the other artists who catered to the whims of the elite. His work was a reflection of his identity, his experiences as a black man growing up in a world that constantly told him he wasn't enough. His paintings captured the raw beauty of his struggle, the pride of his heritage, and the fire of his ambition. But the galleries didn't see it that way. He reached for a nearby sketchbook, flipping through pages filled with drawings of past projects, ideas that had never come to fruition. Each sketch seemed like a whisper, a promise to himself that one day he would be recognized for his talent. But each rejection letter he received from gallery after gallery was a loud, painful reminder that the art world wasn't ready for someone like him. Jamal sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. He had spent years working tirelessly, perfecting his craft, only to be told time and time again that his work was too aggressive, too controversial. The last gallery he had approached had told him flat out, "Your work doesn't fit with our aesthetic." To them, Jamal's art was too raw, too real, too unrefined. The rejection had stung, but Jamal wasn't ready to give up. He couldn't. Art wasn't just something he did, it was who he was. Every brushstroke was a way for him to fight against the odds, to fight against the expectations placed on him simply because of his race. He had been told his entire life that he couldn't succeed in the art world. He had been told that black artists didn't belong in galleries, that their work wasn't worthy of attention. But Jamal knew better. His work wasn't just art, it was a statement. It was a revolution. As Jamal paced across the room, his eyes landed on a painting he had recently completed, a portrait of a woman standing strong against a backdrop of swirling colors, the figure defined by bold strokes and powerful contrasts. Her face was defiant, her eyes unyielding. Jamal had poured every ounce of his frustration into this piece, channeling his anger, his hopes, his dreams. It was a testament to the resilience of black women, to the strength that came from embracing one's identity in a world that constantly tried to erase it. His fingers brushed over the edge of the canvas, and for a moment, he felt a sense of calm. He knew that one day, someone would recognize the beauty in his work, even if the world wasn't ready for it yet. But in the back of his mind, the doubt lingered. Would anyone ever see his art the way he saw it? Would anyone ever understand the depth of emotion, the layers of meaning behind every stroke? His phone buzzed, breaking his train of thought. It was a message from his best friend, Marcus. "You still up? Gallery event tomorrow. Wanna come?" Jamal hesitated, staring at the message for a moment. The last thing he wanted to do was face another group of wealthy, elitist gallery owners who didn't care about art, they cared about status. But Marcus had been persistent, urging him to network, to put his work in front of more people. Maybe this was his chance. Maybe this time, things would be different. He typed a quick response, "I'll think about it." As he set his phone down, Jamal's gaze returned to the painting of the woman. He knew he had to keep going. Even if the world didn't recognize his worth yet, he had to keep pushing forward. For himself. For his community. For every artist who had been told they weren't good enough. The next evening, Jamal reluctantly made his way to the gallery event. The sleek, polished building stood in stark contrast to the gritty neighborhood he called home. The moment he walked inside, he felt out of place. The walls were lined with minimalist art, bright, abstract pieces that screamed wealth and exclusivity but lacked the soul Jamal poured into every brushstroke. The guests milled about, admiring the art, sipping champagne, and exchanging polite conversation. No one paid him any attention. Marcus spotted him from across the room and waved him over, a broad grin on his face. "Jamal, man, I'm so glad you could make it." Jamal offered a half-hearted smile. "Yeah, I'm here. Not sure what I'm looking for, though." Marcus chuckled, clapping him on the back. "You've got to get out of your own head, man. You never know who's gonna be here. Just talk to people. You've got the talent. It's all about making the right connections." They mingled for a while, but Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. Every conversation felt shallow, as if the people around him were more interested in the price tag of a painting than its meaning. But then, as he walked past a cluster of people admiring a piece by a well-known artist, he overheard something that caught his attention. "That's exactly what I'm talking about," said a man in an expensive suit, standing with a gallery owner. "This work has everything: aesthetics, appeal, and an established market. It's the kind of thing we need in our collection." The gallery owner nodded, his eyes gliding over the painting with disinterest. "Yes, but you know what's even better? Something fresh. Something new. It's all about having the next big thing." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. He could tell from their conversation that this gallery owner, Gregory, was exactly the kind of person who dismissed art based on trends rather than substance. He was the type who rejected originality in favor of what was safe. And Jamal hated that. Before he could walk away, Marcus nudged him. "You should talk to Gregory," he suggested. "He's the one who owns this place. He's got connections, and he loves finding fresh talent." Jamal hesitated, the voice of self-doubt creeping in again. But he pushed it aside. "All right, I'll give it a shot." He made his way over to Gregory, who was standing next to a group of well-dressed patrons, nodding approvingly at a large abstract painting on the wall. When Gregory saw Jamal approach, he turned his head, sizing him up with a look of mild curiosity. "Hey, I'm Jamal," he said, extending his hand. "I'm an artist." Jamal, huh?" Gregory interrupted, glancing at him dismissively. "You know, we only accept work that fits a certain aesthetic here. Your style, it's a little too aggressive, don't you think?" Jamal's jaw tightened. He'd heard it all before, the vague comments about his art being too bold, too daring. He forced himself to smile, keeping his voice steady. "I think art should provoke thought. It should challenge people." Gregory raised an eyebrow. "That's cute. But you know, people don't really buy thought-provoking art. They buy art that's easy to look at. The kind that doesn't make people uncomfortable." Jamal's heart sank. He had expected some form of rejection, but the cold, dismissive nature of Gregory's words stung more than he had anticipated. Without saying another word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. As he left the gallery, Jamal couldn't help but feel defeated. The world wasn't ready for his vision, it seemed. He had poured his heart into his work, and yet, all it seemed to do was make people uncomfortable. But as he walked through the streets back to his apartment, a thought began to form in his mind. Maybe they weren't ready for him yet. But someday, they would be. The next morning, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling of being judged, of being misunderstood. The encounter with Gregory at the gallery gnawed at him all through the day. He couldn't stop thinking about Gregory's dismissive tone, the way his eyes scanned him like he was just another face in a crowd, not worthy of recognition. The rejection felt personal, not just about his art, but about who he was, his identity, his experiences, his very essence. But Jamal refused to let it break him. He knew he wasn't just creating art for the approval of the elite, or for the validation of people who saw art as nothing more than a commodity. He was creating for himself, for his community, for those who understood what it meant to survive in a world that didn't care about you. He grabbed his phone and started scrolling through his contacts. The upcoming art event that Marcus had mentioned last night seemed like another chance, another opportunity to prove himself, even if the gallery world wasn't ready for him. Maybe this time, it would be different. Maybe someone, somewhere, would finally see the value in his work. After a moment's hesitation, Jamal sent Marcus a quick message, "I'll be there. Let's make it happen." Later that evening, Jamal found himself walking back into the same sleek gallery where he had felt so out of place the night before. The lights were bright, and the atmosphere was just as cold and sterile as he remembered. A stark contrast to the warmth of his own studio, where he had created every piece with love and passion. As he entered, the sound of low conversation and clinking glasses filled the air. Guests in designer suits and elegant gowns swirled around the gallery, admiring the latest exhibition, a collection of works from famous artists whose names were stamped on the lips of the art world's most influential curators. It was the kind of place where only the privileged could thrive, and the kind of event where Jamal had never felt less welcome. He scanned the room, looking for Marcus. The usual crowd of wealthy art buyers and critics milled about, nodding in approval at paintings that seemed more concerned with maintaining a certain status quo than with challenging perceptions. Every piece looked like it had been carefully curated to fit a specific, safe narrative, nothing that made Jamal's heart race or his mind question the world around him. When he finally spotted Marcus, he was talking animatedly to a man in a sharp suit, gesturing toward a large canvas on the wall. Marcus saw Jamal and waved him over with a wide grin. "Jamal, there you are. I was starting to think you weren't coming," Marcus said, his voice upbeat as he greeted his friend. "I'm here, man. I don't know if I belong here, though," Jamal replied, glancing around at the sea of well-dressed patrons who were engrossed in polite, meaningless conversation about art that wasn't challenging anyone to think, to feel, to question. Marcus chuckled, clapping Jamal on the back. "Trust me, you do. You've got something they need to see. Don't overthink it. Just talk to people." Before Jamal could respond, Marcus turned to the man he'd been speaking to. "Gregory, this is my friend Jamal. He's an artist, and you need to see his work." Jamal's stomach tightened. Gregory, the gallery owner, had been standing off to the side, eyeing him with mild disinterest. His sharp eyes flicked between Marcus and Jamal, then settled on him, sizing him up as if he were another potential object for his collection. Gregory's cold smile felt more like a smirk as he extended his hand. "Jamal, right? I remember you from last night." Jamal's hand hesitated for a moment, then he took Gregory's hand with a firm grip, despite the faint sense of unease that washed over him. "Yeah, that's me." Gregory's gaze lingered for a second longer than necessary before he turned back to the painting on the wall, nodding approvingly. "I see you're still trying to make a name for yourself in this world. I admire the persistence." Jamal's smile was tight. "I don't need anyone's approval," he replied, his voice steady, though inside he was fighting the urge to snap back. He wasn't here to argue about his worth. He was here to show Gregory, to show everyone, that his art was more than just something to hang on a wall. "Oh, I'm sure you don't," Gregory said, his tone still polite but condescending. "But let's be real. You know as well as I do that the art world isn't just about persistence. It's about finding the right audience. The right people. The right money." Jamal's jaw clenched. The conversation was already starting to feel like a waste of time. He didn't care about the money. He cared about telling stories. He cared about leaving a legacy, about making a mark in a world that had long ignored people like him. Marcus, sensing the tension, cut in. "Come on, man, let's not get into all that right now. Jamal's work speaks for itself." I told Gregory about some of the pieces Jamal has been working on. He's got something different, something that the world's not quite ready for. But it's coming, trust me. Jamal met Gregory's gaze, not backing down. "I create for people who understand it, not just people who want to buy it for the sake of exclusivity." Gregory raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but still not fully convinced. "That's bold, I'll give you that," he said, though his voice was laced with doubt. "But will it sell?" I'm not interested in selling to the highest bidder. I'm interested in making art that matters, Jamal said firmly, surprising even himself with the conviction in his voice. Gregory chuckled softly, the sound cold and disinterested. Well, that's very noble of you, Jamal. But art is a business, too. And business is about finding buyers who are willing to pay top dollar for something they can flaunt in their living rooms. Jamal looked around the gallery, his eyes scanning the walls filled with art that felt hollow. He could see it, the polished, commercial works that hung in every gallery like trophies to be bought and sold. But he couldn't help but feel like a part of him was suffocating in this environment. This wasn't the kind of space he wanted to be in. The thought of leaving crossed his mind, but then he remembered why he was here in the first place. This was his moment, his chance to make Gregory see, to make him understand that art was more than just an investment. Art was about voice. It was about expression. And that was something no price tag could quantify. Before Jamal could say another word, Gregory shifted his attention back to the painting they had been discussing. Well, we'll see how things go. If your work ever changes course, let me know. Maybe we can talk again. The dismissal hung in the air, thick and heavy. Jamal held his ground, his expression steady. He wasn't about to let one gallery owner define his future, no matter how powerful or wealthy he was. As the conversation wound down and the night continued on, Jamal stepped back into the shadows, away from the glossy facade of the art world. His mind was racing, not with frustration, but with clarity. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't here to play by their rules. He would forge his own path, one brushstroke at a time. No matter how much they tried to overlook him, Jamal was determined to show the world the true value of his art. The days after the gallery event felt like a blur. Jamal threw himself into his work, retreating into his studio like he always did after a confrontation. The world outside had rejected him, but he knew he had a responsibility to himself, to stay true to his art, to create pieces that told the story of his life, his community, his people. And if the galleries didn't want it, then so be it. He would find another way. But even in the solace of his studio, doubts crept in. Was he fighting a losing battle? Was there a way for his art to break through, to find its place in the world? He sat in front of the unfinished canvas, his mind racing, unsure of how to continue. His latest piece, a vivid portrayal of a black man confronting the weight of history, was his most ambitious yet, but he couldn't help but feel the familiar sting of doubt as he stared at it. His phone buzzed on the workbench, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from Marcus, who had been persistent in pushing Jamal to keep going. Yo, I got some news. There's a new gallery in town, the Vanguard. It's all about showcasing artists who aren't afraid to challenge the status quo. They want to meet with you. Jamal blinked, reading the message twice. His fingers hovered over the screen as his mind raced. The Vanguard? The name alone intrigued him. A gallery that actually wanted to showcase challenging art? It sounded too good to be true, but if Marcus was involved, maybe this was a real opportunity. He quickly typed a response, "Are you serious? I'll meet them." When? Tomorrow at noon. Let's make this happen, man. The next day, Jamal found himself in front of the building that housed the Vanguard. It was nothing like the pristine, sterile galleries he had grown so accustomed to. The exterior was raw, the brick walls exposed, with graffiti and street art scattered across the entrance like an unspoken declaration of rebellion. Jamal felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. This place was different. It felt real, authentic, like it belonged in his world. Inside, the gallery was even more surprising. The walls were covered in bold, daring pieces, art that made a statement, art that wasn't afraid to provoke thought. It was the kind of space that felt alive with energy, where every corner seemed to pulse with creativity and raw emotion. The artists represented here weren't just trying to make a name for themselves. They were trying to change the world. Marcus was waiting by the entrance, and when he saw Jamal, he waved him over enthusiastically. "This is it, man. The real deal. "You're gonna fit in here like you were made for it," Marcus said with a grin. Jamal felt a wave of relief wash over him. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't out of place. This gallery, with its vibrant, unapologetic art, was the home his work had always deserved. They walked together to the back of the space, where Jamal was introduced to the curator of the Vanguard, a woman named Sophia. She was in her early 30s, with an air of confidence and passion that reminded Jamal of everything he had been fighting for. She welcomed him warmly, her eyes lighting up when Marcus mentioned Jamal's work. "I've heard a lot about you, Jamal," Sophia said, shaking his hand. "We've been following your journey for a while now, and we believe your art is exactly what we're looking for." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. Could this really be happening? After all the rejection, all the doubts, was this the moment he had been waiting for? Sophia continued, her voice steady and sincere. "The Vanguard is all about pushing boundaries. We don't want to just showcase art that's easy to sell. We want to showcase art that challenges people, art that makes them uncomfortable, art that forces them to look at the world through a different lens. That's what your work does, Jamal." Jamal swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling in. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't alone in his mission. There were people who understood him, people who saw the value in his art for the right reasons, not for its marketability, but for its power to spark change. "I've spent my whole life making art that tells the truth," Jamal said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's never been about fitting in. It's about telling stories that matter. Stories that challenge the status quo. I'm not here to make people feel comfortable. I'm here to make them think." Sophia smiled, her eyes full of understanding. "Exactly. And that's why we want you here. Your voice is one that needs to be heard, Jamal. We're ready to help you get it out there." The conversation flowed easily after that. They discussed his work in more detail, and Sophia seemed genuinely interested in the stories behind each piece. It wasn't just about aesthetics for her, it was about the meaning behind the art, the cultural significance, the narrative that each painting conveyed. Jamal couldn't help but feel a sense of validation. Finally, someone understood. After the meeting, Sophia gave Jamal a tour of the gallery. He was in awe of the diverse range of artists featured in the space, each one with their own unique voice, their own perspective on the world. There were pieces that dealt with race, identity, politics, and history, each work offering a new lens through which to view the world. It was a celebration of authenticity, a rejection of the commercialized art world that had tried to silence voices like his. At the end of the tour, Sophia stopped in front of a large, blank wall. "This is where we'd like to feature your first exhibition," she said, her voice confident and warm. "We want to start showcasing your work as soon as possible. We believe in you, Jamal. And we want to help you get your message out there." Jamal stood in front of the blank wall, the weight of Sophia's words sinking in. His mind raced with possibilities. This was it. This was the breakthrough he had been waiting for. The opportunity he had dreamed of, the chance to show the world who he was, to tell his story, to share his art with people who truly understood its worth. For the first time in a long while, Jamal felt a sense of hope surge through him. He wasn't alone. There were people out there who appreciated his work, who saw the value in it beyond the surface. He wasn't just another black artist struggling to be seen. He was a force to be reckoned with, and he was about to take his place in the art world. "I'll do it," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "I'm ready." Sophia smiled, her eyes full of pride. "We're glad to have you on board." Jamal left the Vanguard that day with a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he knew he had found his place. The art world hadn't embraced him yet, but it would. Because his art was not just something to be admired, it was something to be felt, to be experienced. And no matter what, he would keep creating. He would keep fighting. The weeks leading up to Jamal's first exhibition at the Vanguard were a whirlwind of preparation. The gallery was buzzing with excitement as Jamal's work began to take shape on the walls. The pieces he had created over the years, each telling a story of struggle, resilience, and identity, were finally ready to be shared with the world. Each painting, each stroke, had its own narrative, its own voice, and for the first time, Jamal felt confident that his art was about to be seen for what it truly was, a powerful tool for change. Jamal spent long hours in the gallery with Sophia, Marcus, and the team at the Vanguard, carefully selecting which pieces would be displayed. They worked together to create a cohesive exhibition, one that would not only showcase his talent but also speak to the themes of empowerment, racial identity, and resistance that he had always explored in his work. The exhibition would be titled Through Our Eyes, The Unseen Stories, a reflection of his mission to shed light on the untold narratives of Black life and culture. The day of the exhibition opening arrived, and Jamal stood in front of the gallery, taking in the sight of the building once again. The anticipation in the air was palpable, and he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it, the culmination of years of struggle, doubt, and persistence. Everything he had worked for was about to be revealed to the world. Inside, the gallery was already beginning to fill with guests. Critics, curators, artists, and art lovers from all over the city had gathered to witness Jamal's work for the first time. The atmosphere was electric with energy, and Jamal could feel the presence of every eye that lingered on his pieces. There was a sense of validation in the air, an unspoken acknowledgement that his work, his voice, mattered. As the crowd moved through the space, Jamal stood back, quietly observing. People were talking, about his work, about the emotions it evoked, about the stories it told. He overheard snippets of conversation as they discussed the themes of race, identity, and resistance that were so deeply embedded in each piece. For the first time, he felt that his art was being understood, that it was being recognized for its true value. One group of people lingered in front of his painting The Weight of History, a powerful piece depicting a Black man standing tall against the backdrop of historical oppression, his face etched with both the pain of the past and the strength to overcome it. The guests were discussing the depth of the emotions in the painting, the way it made them feel uncomfortable yet enlightened. "I've never seen anything like this before," one woman said, her voice filled with awe. "This piece, it's so raw, so honest. You can feel the history in it, the weight of everything this man has carried." Jamal's chest swelled with pride as he overheard the conversation. This was exactly what he had wanted, to make people feel something, to make them see the world through a different lens. His work was no longer just a personal expression. It had become a dialogue, a conversation about the past, the present, and the future. Sophia came over to him with a smile. "How does it feel?" she asked, her voice full of warmth. Jamal glanced around the room, watching the guests engage with his work. "It feels surreal," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought I'd see this day. I never thought anyone would truly get it." Sophia placed a hand on his shoulder. "They're getting it, Jamal. They're seeing what you've always known was there. And they're connecting with it. Your voice is being heard." The night continued, and the crowd grew larger. Jamal found himself engaged in conversations with collectors, critics, and fellow artists, all eager to learn more about his journey and the stories behind his work. He was no longer the outsider, the artist on the fringe of the art world. He was part of something bigger now, a movement of artists who were unapologetically pushing boundaries and challenging perceptions. As the evening wore on, a well-dressed man approached Jamal, his eyes fixed on the painting Through Our Eyes, a piece that depicted a young Black child staring directly at the viewer, his gaze filled with defiance and hope. The piece was a striking representation of the future, the generations that would continue to fight for their place in a world that had tried to silence them. "This is incredible," the man said, his voice low but sincere. "I've seen a lot of art, but this speaks to me. You've captured something I haven't seen before. It's powerful." Jamal nodded, grateful for the recognition. "It's about looking beyond what's expected, beyond the surface. It's about seeing things through a different lens." The man extended his hand. "I'm Robert Green, an art collector. I'd love to talk to you about purchasing this piece. I believe in what you're doing here." This is important art. Jamal felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. This was the moment he had always dreamed of, the moment when his art was not only recognized, but valued. But more than that, it was a moment of validation, not just for him, but for the stories he had worked so hard to tell. "Thank you," Jamal said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This piece means everything to me. It's a part of who I am, a part of my story. I'm honored that you see its value." Robert smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "I see more than just the art, Jamal. I see the message, the power behind it. And that's what makes it worth so much more than just a piece to hang on a wall." As the night drew to a close, Jamal found himself standing in front of his painting, the weight of history once again, reflecting on how far he had come. The exhibition had been a success beyond anything he had imagined, and he knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would still be challenging. There would always be those who didn't understand, those who rejected what he stood for, but he was no longer fighting alone. His art had found its place in the world. His voice had been heard. And for the first time in his life, Jamal knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The success of Jamal's exhibition at the Vanguard was like a dream come true. The art world had finally begun to recognize his talent and the power of his work. Critics praised his raw, unflinching portrayals of Black identity and historical struggle, and collectors scrambled to acquire his pieces. It seemed as though his place in the art world was secure, but with success came new challenges, ones that Jamal was not prepared for. It started small, a whisper here and there, a comment left under an article, a dismissive remark at an event. But soon, the criticism grew louder, more venomous, as Jamal's name began to circulate more widely in the art community. It wasn't just about his art anymore, it was about him. About his voice. About what he represented. Some critics accused him of playing the race card, of making art that was too political, too in your face. They dismissed his work as aggressive or one-dimensional, implying that his pieces, which dealt with themes of race, identity, and the Black experience, were too narrow in focus to be considered true art. It was the same kind of criticism Jamal had faced throughout his career, but now it was louder. Now it had a wider audience. The backlash reached its peak when a prominent art critic named William Holloway, a figure who had long been considered an authority in the art world, wrote a scathing review of Jamal's exhibition in a well-known art magazine. Holloway's review was brutal, dismissing Jamal's work as self-indulgent and politically charged to the point of being divisive. He argued that the art world didn't need more identity politics, claiming that art should be about beauty and aesthetics, not social issues. The review sent shockwaves through the art community. Jamal had known that his work was controversial, that it challenged the status quo, but seeing it torn apart by someone of Holloway's stature felt like a punch to the gut. The review was more than just an attack on his art, it was an attack on everything he stood for. The history, the struggle, the culture that shaped him. Jamal felt a surge of anger. It wasn't just about the art anymore. It was about the constant battle to be seen, to be heard. He had spent his entire life fighting against a system that tried to silence his voice, and now, even within the art world, that same fight seemed to be continuing. But the backlash wasn't all bad. As his work gained more attention, so did his supporters. Many artists and critics rallied behind him, defending his right to make the kind of art he was passionate about. They spoke out against Holloway's review, arguing that art should never be limited to what was comfortable or safe. They reminded the world that art was, at its core, a reflection of the times, and that Jamal's work was a necessary part of that conversation. Sophia, the curator of the Vanguard, was one of the first to reach out to Jamal after the review was published. She called him personally, her voice full of reassurance. "Don't let this get to you, Jamal," she said. "You know as well as I do that there are always going to be people who try to tear down the people who make a difference. But you're not just making art. You're making history. And history can't be silenced." Her words gave him some comfort, but the truth was, the sting of Holloway's review lingered. The art world was supposed to be a place of open-mindedness, of creative expression. But as Jamal continued to reflect on the situation, he realized that the backlash wasn't just about his art, it was about the discomfort his work caused. His paintings made people confront their own biases, their own privilege, their own complicity in a system that had marginalized Black voices for centuries. And some people, especially those in power, didn't like being forced to confront those uncomfortable truths. The days following the review were a blur of anxiety and frustration. Jamal found himself questioning everything. Was his work too political? Was it too much? Was he alienating potential buyers and audiences with the intensity of his message? The pressure began to weigh on him, and he found himself withdrawing into his studio more and more, avoiding the media, avoiding the world. He spent hours staring at his canvases, wondering if he had made a mistake by choosing to speak so loudly through his art. But then, something happened that changed his perspective. One evening, as he was walking home from the gallery, he received an unexpected message. It was from a young artist named Tasha, who had been following Jamal's work since the beginning of his career. Tasha was a college student, studying fine art and social justice, and she had been inspired by Jamal's courage to speak truth through his art. "Mr. Jamal," the message began. "I just wanted to thank you. Your work means so much to me. I've been struggling to find my own voice as an artist, especially when it comes to addressing issues of race and identity. But seeing your work, it's like I've found the courage to speak my truth. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're doing the wrong thing. You're inspiring us all." Jamal read the message several times, the words resonating deeply within him. Tasha's message reminded him of why he had started this journey in the first place. His work wasn't just for the art world, it was for the people who needed to see themselves reflected in art, for the ones who had been silenced for too long. His paintings weren't meant to make people comfortable. They were meant to make them think, to make them feel, to make them act. He put his phone down and stood in front of his easel, staring at his latest piece, a portrait of a Black woman with eyes full of strength and determination. She wasn't just a figure in a painting. She was every Black woman who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or ignored. She was every voice that had ever been silenced. Jamal knew that the backlash wouldn't stop. There would always be critics, always be those who didn't understand or didn't want to. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that his work was having an impact. It was making people think. It was making people uncomfortable. And sometimes, discomfort was necessary for growth. The following week, Jamal took a deep breath and did something he had been hesitant to do. He reached out to the media. He agreed to an interview with a local news station, determined to speak his truth and defend his art. He wasn't going to let the critics define him, not anymore. He was going to be the one to define his art. In the interview, Jamal spoke about his journey as an artist, the themes of race and identity in his work, and the importance of speaking out against injustice. He didn't shy away from the difficult conversations. He addressed the criticism head-on, explaining that art was supposed to challenge, to provoke, to spark change. He wasn't there to please anyone, he was there to tell the truth. The interview went viral, and soon Jamal was being recognized not just as an artist, but as a voice for change. The backlash didn't disappear overnight, but something had shifted. People were starting to listen, really listen, to what he had to say. And with that shift came a new kind of respect. Jamal was no longer just an artist. He was an advocate, a leader, and a force in the art world. The backlash hadn't broken him. It had only made him stronger. The months following Jamal's viral interview were a whirlwind of opportunities, challenges, and self-discovery. His once solitary journey had transformed into something bigger, a movement that transcended the art world and resonated deeply with communities across the country. Jamal was no longer just an artist, he had become a voice for change, an advocate for the stories that had been overlooked for so long. After the interview aired, Jamal's name was everywhere. His exhibitions continued to sell out, and galleries around the world began to take notice. His pieces were being displayed in major museums, and collectors were lining up to purchase his work. But it wasn't just about the art anymore, it was about the message the conversations his painting sparked, the calls for justice that reverberated through the brushstrokes and colors. Despite the recognition and the success, Jamal remained grounded. He continued to focus on his craft, creating art that was not only a reflection of his own journey but a reflection of the struggles and triumphs of his community. His latest pieces were more personal than ever before, each one an exploration of Black joy, resilience, and love, juxtaposed against the backdrop of historical pain and injustice. But the weight of the attention began to take its toll. Jamal found himself pulled in multiple directions: media interviews, speaking engagements, collaborations with other artists and activists, and as much as he appreciated the platform his art had given him, he couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. There were days when he wanted nothing more than to retreat into the solitude of his studio, to lose himself in his paintings and block out the noise of the world. One such day, after a particularly grueling interview, Jamal found himself standing in front of his canvas, the brush in his hand feeling heavy. He stared at the blank space before him, unsure of where to go next. It wasn't that he had lost his passion, it was that he had begun to question how much of his work was shaped by the expectations of others, how much of it was influenced by the labels that had been placed on him. Was he still creating art for himself, or had he become a symbol for something bigger than he was ready to carry? Sophia, ever the supportive presence in his life, was there to remind him of why he had started this journey in the first place. She had seen Jamal's struggles from the very beginning, and she understood the weight that came with the responsibility he now carried. "Jamal, you've always known that art is about truth," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "Your truth. The world might try to box you in, but you're the one who decides how your story is told. Don't let anyone tell you what you should or shouldn't paint. You're not just an artist. You're a storyteller. And that's something the world desperately needs right now." Her words resonated deeply with him, and Jamal finally understood what he needed to do. He wasn't just creating art to make people think or make them uncomfortable. He was creating art to heal, to bring people together, to celebrate the richness of Black culture and history. It wasn't about the critics or the labels, it was about the power of art to connect, to inspire, and to spark change. Determined to push forward, Jamal threw himself back into his work with renewed energy. He poured his heart into every stroke, every color, every detail. His latest piece, titled Roots of Resilience, was a bold and vibrant depiction of a Black woman surrounded by a tapestry of African symbols and patterns, her face radiating strength and pride. It was a celebration of heritage, of ancestors who had fought for their freedom, and of a future built on the foundation of resilience. As the piece began to take shape, Jamal felt a deep sense of peace. This was the art he had always wanted to create, the art that spoke to the soul, that transcended the boundaries of race, that told a universal story of survival, love, and hope. He knew that it would be his most important work to date. The unveiling of Roots of Resilience was set to coincide with an international exhibition in Paris, a prestigious event that would place Jamal's work alongside some of the most celebrated artists of the modern era. The anticipation was palpable, and the art world was buzzing with excitement. For Jamal, it was the culmination of everything he had worked for, a chance to share his message with a global audience. When the night of the exhibition arrived, Jamal found himself standing in front of his painting once again, watching as people from all over the world admired his work. There were whispers of admiration, words of awe, but most importantly, there was a profound silence that hung in the air, one that spoke of recognition, of understanding, of the power of art to transcend language and culture. In that moment, Jamal realized that his journey had come full circle. The struggles, the doubts, the criticisms, all of it had led him to this point. He had remained true to his vision, and in doing so, he had found his place in the world. His art was no longer just about one man's experience. It was about the shared experiences of a community, a culture, and a world that needed to be reminded of its own humanity. As Jamal looked around the room, he noticed something that made his heart swell with pride. There were people of all races, all backgrounds, standing in front of his work, nodding in recognition, in silent understanding. For the first time, he felt that his art was truly bridging the gap, that it was speaking not just to Black people, but to everyone. In the weeks that followed, Roots of Resilience was featured in major art publications, its impact rippling across the global stage. But more than the accolades or the recognition, what mattered most to Jamal was the conversations his art sparked, conversations about history, identity, and the ongoing fight for equality. It was no longer about defending his work against critics. It was about empowering others to find their own voice, to share their own stories. And for Jamal, that was the greatest victory of all. The international success of Roots of Resilience marked a pivotal moment in Jamal's career, but more importantly, it signified a shift in his perspective. As his influence grew, so did the responsibility he felt, not just as an artist, but as a leader within his community and the global conversation about race, art, and identity. He had once been a solitary artist in a crowded, often hostile world. Now, he was at the forefront of a movement, one that was shaping the future of contemporary art. Jamal's days became a blur of exhibitions, public speaking engagements, and collaborations with other artists, activists, and organizations. He continued to create, but his work was no longer just about expression, it was about action. His art had become a tool for social change, a means to challenge systemic oppression and inspire future generations to fight for a more just world. One day, as Jamal sat in his studio, working on a new piece, his phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. It was an invitation to speak at a prestigious international conference on racial justice and the arts. The event, held in New York City, was an opportunity to share his journey, his art, and his vision for the future of the art world. It was also a chance to connect with other artists who were using their craft to fight for justice and equality. Jamal hesitated for a moment, unsure if he was ready to take on such a significant responsibility. He had spent years pouring himself into his work, but now, the world was looking to him for answers. Would his voice be enough to make a difference? Could he live up to the expectations placed on him? But as he looked around his studio, surrounded by the pieces that had come to define his career, he realized something important. His journey had never been about meeting other people's expectations. It had always been about staying true to himself, to his roots, to the stories that needed to be told. He had always found strength in his art, and now, he had the opportunity to use that strength to make an even greater impact. He agreed to speak at the conference. The day of the conference arrived, and Jamal stood in front of a room filled with activists, artists, and thought leaders. He had spoken at smaller events before, but this was different. The room was buzzing with anticipation, and as Jamal took the stage, the silence that followed felt heavy with expectation. The spotlight was on him, but it wasn't about him anymore. It was about the work, the message, the legacy he was building. Jamal began by recounting his journey, his struggles as an artist, his battles with doubt, and the transformative power of his art. He spoke about the critics, the challenges, and the moments of self-discovery that had shaped him into the artist he was today. But most importantly, he spoke about the importance of community and the role art could play in creating meaningful change. "I didn't start creating to be famous," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I started because I had a story to tell. A story that wasn't being told. A story of my people, of my culture, of the history that shaped me. And as I shared that story, I realized something. I wasn't just speaking for myself. I was speaking for everyone who had ever been silenced. Everyone whose voices had been overlooked. Art is power. Art is resistance. And art is a way to connect people across divides." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. But it's not just about creating art that challenges. It's about creating art that uplifts. Art that celebrates. Art that says, we are here. We matter. And when we create art that speaks to our truth, we don't just change the art world, we change the world. The room erupted in applause. For Jamal, it wasn't the applause that mattered, it was the sense of shared understanding. The realization that the people in that room, like him, were all part of something bigger. A movement that was reshaping the narrative, not just in the art world, but in society as a whole. In the months that followed, Jamal continued to speak at conferences, collaborate with other artists, and mentor young people who were eager to find their own voice through art. He worked with organizations that aimed to bring art to underserved communities, believing that everyone, regardless of their background or circumstances, should have access to the transformative power of creativity. One of the most significant moments in Jamal's journey came when he was invited to curate an exhibition at the prestigious Museum of Modern Art in New York. The exhibition, titled Voices Unheard, Art as Resistance, featured work from a diverse group of artists who used their craft to speak out against injustice and inequality. The exhibition was a tribute to those who had been marginalized, who had been silenced, and who had fought to have their voices heard. It was a celebration of the power of art to challenge, to heal, and to unite. As Jamal walked through the museum on opening night, he felt a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. His work, his journey, had come full circle. He had gone from being a struggling artist trying to find his place to being a recognized force in the art world, an artist who had used his platform to speak out for change. And in doing so, he had created a legacy that would inspire future generations. Jamal knew that his work would never be finished. There would always be more stories to tell, more battles to fight, and more art to create. But as he looked around the room, seeing the faces of people who had been touched by his work, he realized that he had already made a difference. His art had sparked conversations, opened minds, and brought people together in ways he had never imagined. For Jamal, that was the true meaning of success. It wasn't about fame or accolades, it was about knowing that his work had changed something, had moved someone, had helped open a door for someone else to find their voice. As the evening came to a close and the last of the guests filed out of the museum, Jamal stood alone in front of his painting, Through Our Eyes, the piece that had started it all. The child's eyes stared back at him, full of defiance and hope. And in that moment, Jamal knew that the story was far from over.